Are we live? Are we doing this? Are we like starting? I'm sorry, I don't want dead air to start this. Steve, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Thanks for having me on.
I am so excited to do this. So last year, this event was in December, and I kicked off that event as well, interviewing Do Kwon, the CEO of Terra. And I'm not saying it was because of that interview, but Terra went on a tear from about 25 cents to $22 over the next 3 months after that talk. And so we need to show similar results from Algorand. So I don't know what you got to say today, but let's kick it off.
Yeah, let's do it for sure.
So let's just start with an easy question. What makes Algorand different from everything else out there?
Sure. Well, I guess, it starts with how Algorand was started. Silvio Micali, who's a Turing Prize winning cryptographer and a longtime MIT professor, was really excited about the innovation and use of cryptography and distributed computer science that he saw in Bitcoin, but felt that if you were going to really scale or really bring digital currency and payments and public blockchains to world scale, that there was a fundamentally different set of technology needed. And I think where Algorand has taken a different approach than some of the other technology is, one, maintaining decentralization in the pursuit of scalability and security. And so not just sort of picking 2 out of the 3, but then also really thinking about public blockchains as a way to communicate value and a way to create programmable money, and thinking about what layer 1 primitives are needed in a platform to enable not only the exchange of simple payments, but how you create new assets, how you create a platform that enables much more sophisticated smart contracts, but again, doing all those things while maintaining kind of the full speed and scalability of the chain. So I think Algorand has both tackled a number of or has created a number of tools that help make it really straightforward and secure to build very sophisticated, I'd say, financial products and to issue assets on chain, but also doing that in a way that doesn't sacrifice what we think is a really important element, which is the decentralization, and doing that while creating very strong performance and scalability characteristics.
Yeah. So, okay. So what you just said means, like, there's a lot of meaning in there, but everybody often says exactly the same thing. So I'd love to unpack this a little bit, and I'd
Sure.
love it if this audience could come away from this talk really understanding that everything you just said is not just true, and not bullshit, but also how important it is. And so from our experience, we first invested in Algorand in like 2018 or 2019. And at the time, we wrote a research report where we talked a lot about the monetary sort of foundations of algo and what it could accomplish and why it was interesting. We didn't get too deep into the tech at that time, and in fact, we didn't fully understand it. Fast forward until this year, where we've taken a significantly deeper dive into everything under the hood, and we've released just a couple days ago now, sort of our sequel to the original algo research report, and that's on our website at arringtoncapital.com. And we really, really got into the details. And I want to talk about a bunch of areas that we got into in that. And you actually just touched on most of them in your sort of summary, but I think it's worth unpacking quite a bit of that.
Great.
And I think that's a good use of the time. Yeah. And actually, why don't we start with that? At first, I was thinking we maybe end with some of the under the hood stuff, but let's start with it as a foundational layer. And so you talked about, well, one of the problems in crypto is you can either be fast or you can be decentralized. And we see that with some layer 1s, that they are either quite decentralized and slow, or they're very, very fast, but they're not decentralized. Can you tell me, to start, why decentralization actually matters? Because when these blockchains are fast and they work and they're doing 1,000 transactions a second and everything's great, what's there to be worried about?
Well, I think there's a lot to be worried about, and I think we're only just starting to get to some of the concerns as the scale of assets and the scale of transactions starts to go up. But I think to really understand why decentralization matters, I think you really need to consider what public blockchains represent. And it's really a shift from a world where largely financial transactions are governed by your trust in the person that you're transacting with, your trust in the firm they work for, and the government and the regulatory framework that exists. And I think when you shift to transacting on public blockchains, it's a different counterparty risk that you have to understand. And I think that that's why, one, sort of the foundation and the quality of the technology is important, but also in that world, decentralization becomes very important because you don't want an arbitrary actor on the network to be able to have control over whether your transaction happens or not, whether they jump ahead of you and run their transaction first if they see something they like, or you have problems like double spending. And so unless you have a decentralized network, you fundamentally have no way to ensure that every party on the network, regardless of where they're located or who they are, can trust that the network will process their transaction in a fair way. And so I think that's a really critical thing. And I think that idea of counterparty risk isn't something that the public blockchain market has really, or people using public blockchains have really come to grips with just yet. And I think when you look at things like the whole MEV discussion that's happening and other, other things going on, I think that's the beginning of I think people starting to understand that there's repercussions to systems that either aren't decentralized or have kind of problems in the way they process transactions fairly.
Yeah, I mean, MEV is a topic we could talk about for an hour on its own. But if investors are consistently seeing their lunch be eaten by other people, they start to get concerned, even if the network overall seems fast. One of the things I think what you're saying is decentralization doesn't matter until it does, and then it matters more than anything else when something goes wrong.
For sure. And I think it matters when things go wrong, but it also matters when, I think we're just getting into the place where you have high asset value, high value transactions. Yep. And if you think about two countries and, they may have concerns that an intermediary could prevent them from transacting with who they want to, or, being able to block transactions from happening. And so I think, at a small scale, these things are sort of hard to contemplate, but as you get into larger, kind of world scale, which is where we're headed in these markets, I think it's much easier for people to understand that there's significant implications if bad actors can be in the middle of transactions.
Okay, so we've established, I hope, at least at a ground level, that decentralization does matter. How is it that Algorand is, you can have your cake and eat it too? Because generally the trade-off is speed versus decentralization. Algorand, there literally is no trade-off. We understand that now, but I don't think most people do. And I think it's worth understanding that if possible.
Sure. Well, I think, if you look at sort of I guess the short answer is Algorand represents fundamentally new computer science in a lot of areas. Distributed systems are often, governed by Byzantine agreements. There was only a couple of forms of Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols out there that people are using. And one of the things that's a complication there is that it's very difficult for those systems to switch leaders. And so that's why when you see systems that have, a handful of block proposers, those tend to be, faster ones because it's easier for them to sort of trade around them. The ones that tend to be slower, like Bitcoin, are much more decentralized, but they're, solving this problem in different ways. Algorand works in a sort of fundamentally different way from most other systems, where instead of the miners controlling the network, it's actually the users that control the network. And for every user who's online, they run a cryptographic lottery on their own computer, which only takes literally a millisecond. And one winner is selected to propose a block of the transactions that they see outstanding, and about 1,000 people are selected to validate the block. And those lotteries happen in secret on your own computer, and the votes are circulated along with the block itself. And so one of the secrets in Algorand is that ordinarily you'd say, great, I'll just attack the block proposer. But in Algorand, you don't know who the proposer is until the block is already confirmed. And so it's impossible to know who to attack. And then by the time you go to attack them, the leader is changed in the next round and it all happens again. And so it's sort of in the elegance of that system and this use of cryptographic sortition that makes it both very efficient because you don't have to run computationally intensive puzzles, but then also because the leader and the validators are changing every single block, you never know who to attack, and that makes it very resilient.
So it is truly decentralized, but it acts like it's more centralized when actually blocks are being mined. And so how that does that is very elegant. We go into great detail in section 3 in our research report that, again, is on our website. And there's other resources online to talk about that as well. So, I mean, to the extent we can in 10 minutes, I think we've established that Algorand is interesting, particularly compared to its competitors. And again, like for us, weeks of research, like hard research went into this for us to draw these conclusions. And this has been going on for a couple of years. For Algorand to be successful, ultimately, it needs to have a robust network and ecosystem of third-party products and companies built on it. The fund that we have launched, actually, its core focus is to invest in these companies, and we've started doing that, and we're meeting, tens of these companies now. I'd love to hear your perspective on some of your favorites, or I'm happy to talk about some of ours as well. I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but there's some just fantastic new companies out there.
For sure. So I think if you look, we're seeing a lot of organic growth, and I guess just to back up, you sort of mentioned the ecosystem. I think if we look over the course of 2021, or even a little bit further out, there's over 700 projects building on Algorand, over 4.5 million assets, many of them non-fungible, have been created this year. With over 12 million accounts, and so I think we're seeing very quick growth. In terms of, I think some of the things that excite us is really started to see, I think, a lot of development in organic applications building in the ecosystem, whether it's things like AlgoDex or TinyMan, which is an AMM, or applications like Opulus, which is a set of DeFi tools for musicians. I think we're starting to see some really interesting ones. And, just to go back to Opulus for a minute, I think that's actually a really interesting case of applications from kind of the DeFi and crypto world crossing over to the more traditional world. So CI, which is Italy's national music rights system, deployed about 4.5 million NFTs, which represent the music rights to 100,000 musicians. And the reason they did it was they wanted to bring those rights on chain for transparency reasons, but also in the hopes that there would be more sophisticated financial tools, especially to help middle-class artists so they can keep creating music and working. And if you look at Opulus, that's a crypto-native set of tools for fractional sales of music rights, borrowing, lending, and I think that that's a really interesting intersection where you have a 130-year-old business and a very new form of DeFi application coming together and creating really good outcomes for new people. So I think that's particularly exciting. But really, I think we're starting to see people come up with really inventive approaches to solving a lot of different problems.
Yeah, we've seen PlaneWatch, the air pollution monitoring on Algo. We've seen Folks Finance, which is more traditional borrow lending. Shift Markets is one you didn't mention that we've met. I hope I didn't just break news on them, but Forex, absolutely fascinating business model. I know some Forex guys are looking very carefully at that. I mean, it's a robust ecosystem. And I think we're going to see that Algorand can handle high-speed trading functions as well as anybody else out there. And I'm excited to see some of these things launch. But what about CBDCs? And what are your thoughts on that? And where does Algo fit in with that? 'Cause you've been pretty public about your desire to run these.
Yeah, well, I think it's a pretty interesting. Space. I think there's a few different variations that we're seeing kind of form out there. One are fiat currencies where countries are looking to bring their fiat currencies onto blockchains and have a digital representation of them. I think if you look in, say, Europe, they already have an idea of e-money and sort of a regulated digital version of the euro, even though the central bank is sort of managing things in a similar way. I think we've seen in the US different approaches, but I think if you look at USDC, especially as a stable coin and kind of a private version of digital money, we're seeing that go really well. And I think more and more we're starting to see different kind of hybrid approaches. So I think it's going to be an exciting time. I think you'll see not only over the course of probably 2021, but certainly starting now going forward, a lot of different central banks taking slightly different approaches to how they embrace digital money. But I think, the reason CBDCs are exciting, I think people get excited about the idea of sort of national scale projects, which for sure are. But I think what's really even more exciting is we're at the very early stages of programmable money. And I think what, CBDCs really, irrespective of what form they take, are leading to are what I think many people have hoped for in kind of the crypto space, which is the ability to have more people participating in the financial system and in investment opportunities and being able to earn yield and use all of these inventive financial products that are out there. And there's about a third of the world, and in some places, many much higher percentages don't have access to traditional bank accounts. And so I think when you start to make money programmable, just like I think in the early days of the internet, it would have been hard to imagine all the different applications that we use on our phone and elsewhere all day. I think we're just getting into kind of the initial stages of that. So we see, whether it's in the form of private stable coins or nationally issued stable coins or digital fiat currencies, we think all of those forms will likely sort of coexist for a while. And we think that our story around decentralization and scalability plays really well there. And also, I think that the quality of our technology, when countries and more significant institutions start to look into it, I think that favors us. But we think beyond that, this is really the underpinnings for much more sophisticated financial products that people can use kind of all over the place and not be limited to where they live.
So just to unpack that a little bit. So first of all, I'd love to ask you what you think the first countries to issue these will be, and do you have their business or not? But you're probably not going to answer that. But I would, CBDCs are somewhat Orwellian, and they can be ultimate control over the population. We can put that aside because almost any tool can be used for good or evil. But one of the things that excites me about them, and you mentioned this, is the ultimate fine tuning where you can do stimulus or yield control at an address level, which is at an individual human level, and something that's absolutely impossible with money as we know it today. And obviously those are powerful tools that can be used for good or evil. I assume that when you talk to countries, to the extent you are, that they're very interested in some of these tools that you're able to give them.
I think the answer to that is absolutely. I don't think it, I know it. And I would say beyond the kind of things that you raised, so I'd say there's two parts. One is how can central banks and fintechs and financial institutions in different countries help people and also have the tools to be able to have more sophisticated policy to help their people. I think we've seen it even in the government stimulus in the US. Money sort of went out indiscriminately to people whether they really needed it or not. So I think the idea that policy can target people that actually need the assistance and give them the right amount of assistance rather than just casting a wide net and hoping for the best is really important. There's sort of a separate thing that we see really often, which is central banks aren't necessarily big fans of the way the banking system is set up, even for themselves, which is largely central banks interface with a handful of large banks in any given country, and they sort of really have control over all of the lending and borrowing that goes on. I think there is a desire within the people controlling the money supply in different countries to be able to have money in the hands of different parties that can do more creative things and can lend more directly to people. Now, it doesn't mean that they want to be interfacing as a central bank with every single retail user in their country, but they certainly can have a broader set of people that interact with them than they do today. So I think that I think as people start to think about how policy intersects money, we'll start to see much more creative solutions when countries can take advantage of programmable money. And then I think separately, it also allows sort of the possibility for central banks to start rethinking how they actually manage their own business and who they interact with, again, for the benefit of the citizens of a given country.
When will we see this? This year? Will we see announcements made this year? Next year? When will things, when is this happening?
I think, we'll start to see it this year, for sure.
So you have deals done that you will start announcing.
That's a nice way to try and back into it, but we'll see. I think we'll see some interesting things happen over the course of this year.
Okay, fair enough. So is Algorand, is it carbon neutral? Is it carbon negative? Do you care? Does this matter? Explain.
Matters a lot. I think this is sort of one of the other sides of the coin where I realize that there's a lot of positions on energy utilization. I think Bitcoin, by virtue of it being the biggest asset, tends to focus a lot of the attention here. But our take is that, one, energy consumption matters. I think climate, you even look what's going outside your window right now, and I think climate is definitely becoming a first-class concern for people all over the place. So I think energy usage as a proxy for that is something that is very important. It's only going to grow in importance. There's a few elements to that. I think irrespective of whether you're carbon negative or neutral, or carbon or generating carbon, I think understanding what the consumptive kind of value is of a transaction is very important. So Algorand, as a starting point, is about it's many orders of magnitude. I believe it's actually about 1 million X better than Bitcoin, but don't quote me on the million. It's in any event, it's much more efficient and uses virtually no energy or computational power for an individual transaction. And again, that's by virtue of the way the technology works. The second part is for whatever energy you're consuming, being able to offset that we think is very important. And so you mentioned climate trade a little while ago as someone that you've spoken to. We think that what climate trade represents is something really important. And just like we talked about programmable money, the ability to in a programmatic way offset the carbon consumed in the process of generating transactions, we think is very important. And so Algorand actually makes that possible because climate trade has an on-chain carbon credit marketplace. Those carbon credits come from UN certified sources, so that actually work was done to offset that carbon. And so for Algorand, we felt it made more sense to have not only the network be carbon neutral, but go one step further and basically take what is already kind of a modest amount of energy in use to run the network back down to below zero. So we're actually bringing carbon out of the atmosphere by virtue of programmatic way we do it. And so I think that that's a important point to look at, because over time, renewables need to factor in more to how people are running public networks. But we think like any other public network that's a resource that the whole world is going to use, needs to be done in a responsible way.
So you mentioned, is it climate trade? You said I mentioned it, but I had not heard of them. What is it called?
I'm sorry, climate trade. I thought you mentioned them, but I was hearing things.
Planet Watch, or Planet Watch is what I mentioned.
I'm sorry. Yes, another really interesting ESG focused company for sure.
Okay. All right, well, we'll check them out. We were talking to a company recently called Moss. It's MOSS, and we don't have an investment in them, but we're really interested in what they're doing. Again, high quality carbon offsets. They're actually based in Brazil, and it's a fascinating world. Voluntary carbon offsets are going to explode, whether you believe in climate change or not, and it's natural for the blockchain. So we want to see as much of that on Algorand as possible.
For sure, we do too.
Yeah. So when we talk to Algorand and the companies building on Algorand about third-party companies, we talked about a bunch of them, but we see DEXs, we see various trading platforms, whether they're centralized or decentralized. We see NFT, payment rails, and tokenized securities. And we didn't talk much about tokenized securities yet, or security tokens, but that's an area that you put investment money and focus on recently. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. We think that that's, we think that really, if you look at, a platform like ours, it's especially well suited, to those kinds of applications. So I think if you look, we're really excited about a bunch of launches. I think what we see as success in the ecosystem is when a number of these applications are actually using each other as they build kind of new tools. And so I think we've really been thinking about not necessarily just having lots and lots of applications themselves, but like what are key tools, where are there projects that we can support but I think also just listening to the market and hearing kind of what improvements are needed in the technology, what kind of developer tools are needed. And so I think if you look at our approach on smart contracts, it's been to start out a little bit simpler, make sure that security is kind of a fundamental piece of it. And as an example, one of the projects that we work with is called Reach. It's a JavaScript-like programming language that makes creating smart contracts very, very simple. But one of the key differentiators for them is that they generate formal verification. So they create formal verification proofs at compile time. So I think anybody who's creating DeFi apps right now not only has to write the application, they have to find somebody to audit it, and it takes all this time before they can launch. And so our view is, by having those audits be part of the actual compilation of the project or program, now you don't have to worry about that time lag, or you have a much, much simpler job at doing it than you would otherwise. And so I think it's not only a matter of targeting cool applications that we want to see build, but it's also thinking about how we have the right developer tools and how we make it a much simpler experience for anybody who wants to come to Algorand and build on the platform.
In the last couple of minutes, and we have a few minutes left, the thing I'd really like to focus on and what I like best about Algorand is your stubborn refusal to engage in the idea of, build now, fix later. And coming from Silicon Valley, that's actually almost a religion, is move fast and break things. But in crypto, well, companies do that quite often. It doesn't always work out well. In fact, it usually doesn't. You guys have had opportunities to do this, but you've been pretty stubborn over the years about taking your time, building everything right. You even just mentioned a minute ago about keeping things pretty simple to start and then building on top of that simplicity once you have it nailed. I'd love for you just to talk a little bit about company culture there and how you've kept the company on track and Silvio has kept the company on track. Has it been challenging for you to watch some of your competitors, leap ahead in some ways in a dangerous way? Just love your thoughts on that.
Well, we focus on, I think say two things. One, looking carefully, not only what the market needs today, but what the market is going to need in the near future and thinking about that. And two, delivering very high quality initial research and very high quality product and tech. And, we welcome anyone to, who's interested to take a look at our code and look at the way we've innovated. But I think one of the keys to efficiency is delivering a high quality product. And while move fast and break things works, I think very well in the sort of specter of kind of web applications, in crypto, that's how people lose money. And so I think we take the fact that we are creating a network for people to communicate value to each other and build sophisticated financial applications and very high value assets seriously. And we think as these become the underpinnings of the world's financial system, you can't afford to deliver something that's subpar. And so I think that's just a very core part of our culture and ethos that you have to do things right the first time. And so we're very focused on doing it that way.
So just in summary, and these are my words, not necessarily yours, but one thing we discovered about Algo is that it appears to be everything that ETH2 wants to be, except it's available right now. And we talked just a minute ago about going slow and building things carefully, but it really does seem to do everything that ETH2 promises. And it does it today. We're not waiting till next year or later, 12 to 18 months out. Is that a true statement, or is it one that you don't want to defend?
Well, I think Ethereum has a great community and they're doing what they're doing. I think we're focused on not only delivering great product that makes it easy for people to develop, but also continuing to innovate and advance that. We've had on average a protocol release every month for the past 2 years, and a few larger ones every year. And so I think that I think we're excited about the community. People are contributing to that, and we'll continue to do it. So I think I think we have to. Yeah, we have a really good platform for, I think, asset issuance. And I think when you look across kind of the security token landscape, people issuing NFTs and, all sorts of interesting financial applications, I think that's what we're excited about. So we're just going to keep cranking on that, and, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, that 30 minutes went fast. Steve, thanks so much for doing this. I know it's late where you are. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.
Have a good
Appreciate
evening.
everything. And yeah, we'll talk to you later.
Bye.